At Ron DeSantis, I had a lot of Ron DeSantis jokes ready. But Mickey Mouse beat the hell out of me, got there first.
President Biden joking about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who may soon join the race to try to unseat him. Time now for our Sunday group. Jewish Insider, editor-in-chief, and Axios contributor Josh Kraushaar. Former State Department spokesperson and Fox News contributor Marie Harf. Former Utah Congressman Jason Chaffetz, and author, legal commentator, and Project 21 chairman Horace Cooper. Welcome to all of you. You made it through the thunderous storms this morning to make it here. Okay, so let's talk about Governor DeSantis. This is the Politico headline. He's got a $110 million ticket to the White House. He sits atop accounts poised to support his candidacy with that total, and that's all without him opening an official campaign committee account. Jason, he met with other major donors over in Israel this week. Will the money be enough to jumpstart him, where the polls say he's flagging?
Well, money does solve a lot of problems. And when you got $110 million, more than double anybody else, then it's going to go a long way. Super PACs are already out there spending money. You see ads, and that fight's already on. This Florida state legislature's got to pass a piece of legislation so he could declare. But I think everybody understands that, yeah, Ron DeSantis is running for president of the United States. Okay, so here's our latest polling. This is among Republican primary voters about who they prefer at this point. President Trump with that commanding lead at 53%. Ron DeSantis at 21%, and we trickle down from there. Nikki Haley bumping up a little bit, and Vivek Ramaswamy as well. But Horace, where do you think this field stands? One headline this week: is Donald Trump inevitable? Is he?
You know, we're very, very early. I will just tell you, in my experience, since 1993, I have not seen, after a presidential election, the loser ending up in surveys prevailing over the victor. And yet, you didn't see that in 93, you didn't see it in 97, you didn't see it in 2001. You go all the way even to 2017, Hillary Clinton never led Donald Trump. We're seeing now more than a dozen times in the last year, Donald Trump ahead. That is a very good position to be in. So there's no doubt that there's still a residual level of support among Republicans, and apparently even among a large number of Americans who may now see the policies of Joe Biden and may regret them.
Well, our polling shows, as I talked about with our first two guests, that President Biden is not polling well. People are mad at him on all kinds of topics. And this poll here on Democratic primary voters, the first one that we've had since RFK Jr. entered the race, and he comes in at nearly 20%. That's against an incumbent president, Marie.
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting things in these polls. I would also note that the people that have lower approval ratings than Joe Biden, that includes Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. So people talk about Biden's approval rating. His two main competitors are actually less popular than he is.
Well, when you look at favorability, they're almost equal.
But they're lower. And look, I think the Biden team feels good about their campaign relaunch this week. They started with this campaign video about freedom, talking about the things Republicans are doing in states, from banning books to, you know, anti-LGBTQ laws. And they say Joe Biden's going to go out. He's going to talk about the economy. He's going to talk about the manufacturing jobs he's helped create, his policies have created. And the leading candidate on the Republican side is facing multiple criminal investigations. You know, Ronna McDaniel was so interesting earlier when she talked about independent voters. That's who elected Joe Biden. And those are the people that I think are very tired of Donald Trump, don't like Ron DeSantis' extreme culture war policies. And the Biden team is going after with their messaging this week about freedom and about getting the job done.
Well, and on the issue of economy, because we know a lot of voters are swayed by that, Josh, our polling showed that when we talk about people who aren't doing well, as I talked about early in the show, 70% of people say things are getting worse for their families. That number is even higher among independents. I think it's around 73%. Will they vote about that, or will they vote about what Maria's saying?
They're going to vote on pocketbook issues, and that is President Biden's biggest vulnerability. I watched his re-election announcement, the video, didn't say a thing about policy, didn't really talk about the economy. And it's not a coincidence, because a clear majority of voters are worried about their economic circumstances. And if we have a recession, if the volatility in the stock market, in 401ks that people are experiencing hits right around the time of the election, anyone can, Trump or any other Republican is capable of winning this election. And I think that's what's keeping Democrats up at night. The fact that poll after poll shows a very competitive race between even Biden and Donald Trump. This is not the type of blowout that I think some Democrats had been anticipating. So the economy is the X factor, and it's going to be the biggest issue for the 2024 campaign.
We also did a lot of polling on other hot button issues, including guns. I want to put this up. Proposals to reduce gun violence. They have enormous support across the board for things like background checks, which, by the way, are mostly done with nearly every gun sale in this country. Existing gun laws, enforce those. A lot of people for that. And other things that you can see here. But is there actually, Jason, do you think any appetite on Capitol Hill to take some of these where there is wide agreement and put them into a piece of legislation?
Well, certainly guns does not have wide agreement out there. The Biden administration just recently announced that they're going to go after shooting sports, and that is not going to play well, particularly in the heartland. The reality is, with the divided government, you're not going to have much of legislation, anything pass. As a conservative, I happen to think that that's a good thing. I'm okay with that. But I got to tell you, Joe Biden, if he doesn't get out there and talk about policy, and he hasn't, because he doesn't have. If you talk about inflation, for instance, what's the Joe Biden plan to tackle inflation? Nobody knows what the answer to that is, because he doesn't have a plan. So you combine that with the inability to communicate and a vice president who's equally as bad at communicating. I think that type of situation is just ripe for Republicans.
Well, and Horace, how much time do you think Republicans are going to talk about the vice president? Because you heard what Nikki Haley said this week. She got a lot of backlash for saying President Biden might not make it to 86. But it does cast added attention on the vice presidential person that's on the ticket.
Okay, so the Democrats are boosting Kamala, saying, if you watch this campaign video, she was all over it some 16 or 17 times. They're boosting, saying you vote for Joe Biden and you'll get Kamala Harris. Presumably that means perhaps he's not going to finish his term. I would say the real answer here is promise or threat, because she is probably the least popular vice president that we have seen in 100 years, and she hasn't improved. She's had 2.5 years to get better, and she's not. One quick thing about the 2022 election. The National Journal and the New York Times both came together and they said Election Day 2022 was 297 electoral votes for the GOP if it had been a presidential year, and that Republican votes outnumbered. If my Dallas Cowboys were favored by 20 for the Super Bowl and they only won by 3, I'd still celebrate. The left has decided that they're going to try a rerun of what they did in 2022. Not a real campaign, not a real platform, but just wedge. I don't believe it's going to work.
I quickly want to ask about, because as I mentioned, the president is underwater on nearly every major issue. That includes the border and immigration. Title 42 is going away on May 11th. National Review, since you mentioned them, oh, you said National Journal. This is National Review, a different publication, but here's what they said about the plan that the Biden administration's put together. It says the plan is lawlessness atop lawlessness all the way down. They say it's really accommodating the wishes of foreigners rather than the immigration limits that have been placed by elected officials here in America. Marie.
Well, we heard the Secretary of State and Homeland Security this week talk about their plan. They're going to surge resources to the border. They're going to have these reprocessing centers in other countries to try and help stem this really crush of people we're seeing. But Democrats will also say to you, we've been making policy, we've been passing bills, we've been rebuilding your communities, and Republicans in Congress have done nothing about this issue that they seem to care about. It's all rhetoric. That's what you'll hear.
Quick final comment.
Yeah, I mean, immigration is one of the weakest issues for the Democrats, and the White House can talk about what they're doing, but once Title 42 goes away, and if you see a surge of illegal migrants crossing the border, it's going to be a big weight on the political fortunes of the Democratic Party.
And I think all sides admit that is coming in May. All right, panel, thank you very much. We'll see you next Sunday.